Under the warm kitchen light that always made our countertop glow like honey, I sealed the last of my wedding invitations and pressed my thumb over the flap as if I could stamp certainty into it, as if one press could promise that the day would be simple, loving, and free of the noise I'd grown up with. The envelopes sat in neat stacks beside a bowl of lemons and a chipped mug, and for a moment I let myself imagine what I used to picture as a kid, walking down a sunny aisle, feeling unshakably chosen, seeing my family smiling like a single bright face. I wanted to believe life could be that easy. I wanted to believe that my sister and I would find the version of ourselves we sometimes reached in rare, almost magical moments, the 10-minute spans when she was gentle and I was brave, when we laughed over old photos and shared an inside joke without anyone else needing to understand it. She is older than me by 3 years and louder than me by a lifetime. Growing up, she had a talent for arriving at any moment that wasn't about her and rearranging it, as if the space had been mistakenly decorated until she walked in and corrected the colour scheme. She wasn't all bad, no one ever is, but she loved the stage. And the more the world turned into a stage with cameras in every pocket and applause available at the tap of a screen, the more the people who loved her became props, and the more she confused attention with affection. When I got engaged to Daniel, a slow, grounded man who reached for my hand even when we didn't need to cross a street, I knew I was inviting steadiness into my life and a storm into my family. The ring was simple and beautiful, the proposal private, the promise honest. We wanted a wedding that felt like a home-cooked meal, warm, generous, not performative. We wanted to mean every word we said. I knew my sister would test that, not because she hated me, but because she fearfully loved the centre and was terrified I'd placed mine somewhere she couldn't reach. The first hints were small enough to brush off. She examined my ring in the same way she used to examine my report card, head tilted, mouth in a polite curve that wasn't quite a smile, and said, "That's very you," which is her way of saying, "That's less than me." She sent me reels of extravagant proposals and bridal shower balloon arrangements and elaborate choreographed entrances to receptions, and wrote, "Maybe this will help you elevate the whole vibe," and I answered with heart emojis because peace has always been more important to me than winning. We grew up in a house where keeping the volume low was a survival skill because raising your voice never helped anyone hear you better, it just woke sleeping dragons. When I chose my best friend, Marissa, as maid of honour, because she knows my silence, because she can hand me a glass of water without asking what's wrong, because she knows how to carry a day without dropping it, my sister responded with a soft "oh" that felt like a sharp object wrapped in cotton. We said our goodnights. An hour later, she posted a story, a black screen with white words about betrayal and blood. She tagged family. I told myself not to look. Of course I looked. Of course I saw the comments from people who only know us as characters on her channel. Of course they had opinions. And of course their opinions felt like pebbles thrown through my window at 2 a.m. Mum called the next day, her voice bending in that way it does when she's balancing love between her daughters like uneven groceries carried in one arm. "Your sister is hurt," she said, and I heard the implied handle it, the way I've always handled it, the way the quieter sibling in any messy family learns to shape herself like foam around a jagged edge. I explained the practical reasons, Marissa's organisation, my sister's unpredictability, but even as I listed bullet points, I heard how reasons always sound like excuses to the person who wants a different ending. "Just keep the peace," Mum said, and I wondered if peace kept at any cost is really peace or merely a pause. I texted my sister that night with an olive branch shaped like words. "I love you. You'll be right beside me that day. I want you there not as a title, but as my sister." She left it on red. Silence can be an answer, it can also be fuel. 2 weeks later, the invitations went out, and I stood at the blue postal box with Daniel's arm around my shoulders, sliding the envelopes through the metal lip like wishes. On the way home, we stopped for ice cream, and he dabbed a smear of vanilla off my nose with his thumb and told me I looked like the future standing in line. That night, while I wiped down the counter and thought about what shoes I'd wear to the final venue walkthrough, my phone lit up with so many notifications it looked like a holiday. I thought maybe a friend had gotten engaged or a cousin had posted something ridiculous. It took me a second to realise the sound was a chorus of alarms, not bells. A co-worker had sent the link with a single message. "I am so sorry." The link opened to my sister's livestream. She had set the frame like a professional. Good lighting, lip gloss precise, nails immaculate, camera positioned to catch the arch of her brow when she told the world a story she was about to direct. In her hand was a white envelope. I knew the handwriting like I know my own. "So," she began, and that word carried a decade of insinuation. "My sister is getting married and she had the nerve to send me this after what she did." And she smiled at the camera with a look that strangers would call playful, and anyone who loved her would recognise as surgical. She slit the envelope, pulled out the invitation I had designed with care, and tore it down the centre. The rip made a clean, horrible sound. "Guess I'm busy that day," she said and winked. The comments poured in at a speed that made my eyes blur. Some people cheered her for setting boundaries, some called her melodramatic, some begged for the full tea, and some posted knife and flame emojis because the internet loves symbols that require no thought. In the space of 3 minutes, my wedding had been translated into content. In the space of 3 minutes, my sister had turned my promise into an episode. I sat down on the kitchen floor because it felt safer to be near the ground. Daniel knelt beside me, and when he saw what I was watching, he didn't say, "What is wrong with her?" or "I told you this would happen," because he doesn't talk like a verdict. He talks like a place. He took my phone, closed the stream, and said, "I'm here." And then he held me while the adrenaline worked its way through my body like a storm that had to rain itself out. My mother called crying, but not the kind of crying that asks for comfort. It was the kind that demands I fix something I didn't break. Family group chats bloomed. Cousins asked if it was real. An aunt I hadn't seen in 5 years messaged, "Don't let the haters steal your joy." And I wanted to respond, "The hater is my sister." Later, my sister texted, "You always get what you want." "Enjoy the attention," I typed back slowly. I wanted peace. That's all I ever wanted. She didn't reply, and silence felt like the sound of a door being shut that I didn't get to touch. We uninvited her after that. It felt brutal and necessary, like sutures. The planner asked quietly if there was anyone we needed to be prepared for, and I said my sister's name. And she nodded in the way professionals nod when they have seen more weddings than love would prefer, and understand that sometimes security is as much a part of a ceremony as roses. For a few weeks, things seemed to settle. I chose a bouquet that looked like a small sunrise, and Daniel practiced his vows in a voice that made me ache with gratitude. But attention is addictive, and withdrawal is loud. When I posted photos from my bridal shower, soft light, an iced cake, the kind of laughter that makes your chin ugly, my sister commented, "Must be nice to fake a happy family." The likes were from cousins who like everything because their thumbs are trained to tap. The algorithm doesn't understand nuance, it only counts. I thought about deleting the post, then thought about deleting every trace of my life online, then realised that retreating would be another way of letting the stage win. I left it up and turned off notifications, because sometimes survival is simply refusing to be summoned. 3 days before the wedding, I almost called it off. Not the marriage, never the marriage, but the event. I sat on the edge of the bed while the evening made patterns on the floorboards and told Daniel that I didn't want to promise my forever in a room that might become a courtroom. He listened and then asked, "What would make it feel like ours again?" I said, "Quiet." And he smiled and said, "Then we'll build quiet inside the noise." He suggested a private first look before anyone arrived, a moment with no audience, the kind of vow you make in your real voice. He asked me to write a letter to myself that I would open right after the ceremony, the way you open the note in a lunchbox when you didn't know you'd need it. I wrote, "You are not responsible for other people's storms." I put the paper in an envelope and pressed my thumb to the flap, as if I could seal in something I'd finally learned. The day of the wedding dawned with obedient sunshine, the kind that wedding blogs call golden. I got ready in a room with tall windows and an old mirror that had probably seen 100 brides and knew not to judge any of them. My dress wasn't spectacular in the way a magazine dress is spectacular, but it was spectacular in the way I am. Simple, precise, not interested in being an advertisement. Marissa laced me up with emotions in her throat and practical instructions in her hands. Breathe through your ribs, shoulders down, we've got this. When I stepped outside for the first look, Daniel turned around slowly and smiled like he recognized me after a long journey I hadn't known I'd taken. "It's you," he said, and I said, "It's me." And for a moment the world was only 2 people and a promise. We said words we didn't need to memorize because we've been practicing them without language for years. I choose you. I will stay. I will learn. I will get it wrong and try again. I will be home. I will let you be a person and not a project. I tucked that moment into my chest like a talisman before we let the day begin. Guests arrived in clothes that rustled and shoes that made temporary blisters. Hugs layered themselves across our shoulders. The venue hummed with the sound of people preparing to witness because people love to witness. It makes them feel like part of something larger, something that will still exist when they go back to their own kitchens and calendars. I felt light. And then the air changed the way air changes when a storm enters a stadium. I didn't see her at first. I sensed her. There is a particular electricity that follows someone who has learned to carry chaos like a perfume. I turned, and there she was at the back, wearing a white dress she must have chosen with intentional malice, the kind of dress that would have been pretty anywhere else and was poisonous here. 2 friends lifted their phones without even meaning to, and I thought, not today. I signaled the coordinator, whose eyes sharpened, and within seconds she was moving with an ease that suggested she'd navigated this exact corridor before, though probably not with sisters. "We need you to leave," she said softly to my sister, and my sister erupted into tears that were as much strategy as sorrow. "My own sister is throwing me out of her wedding," she announced at a volume calibrated for cameras, and a few guests turned in that way people can't help turning when someone performs suffering. Security stepped forward, gentle, firm. My mother followed as they walked my sister out, and Mum looked back at me with worry so raw it felt like a bruise you can't cover. We delayed the ceremony for 40 minutes. I sat in a side room where the flowers smelled like effort, and Marissa pressed a cool cloth to my neck and said, "You are allowed to be angry." I was angry. I was also sad in the deep old way that isn't dramatic enough for streams and likes. I wanted a sister who could sit in the second row and squeeze my hand. I wanted a mother who didn't have to choose which daughter to follow through a door. But wanting doesn't mean you were promised. When the coordinator finally nodded, we took our places. The music began, and I walked down the aisle through air that felt heavier than it had an hour earlier. And I looked at Daniel and found enough light in his face to finish the walk. We said our public vows, the ones we'd chosen, the ones people expect, and I said them like they were brand new. The applause felt like relief more than celebration, and I accepted relief with gratitude because joy, while preferred, isn't always available. The reception was lovely in the way well-planned events are lovely. It carried. People danced. People toasted. People made jokes that were gentler than they could have been because even the ones who loved the show understood they'd almost watched a different ending. I found corners where I could be with my new husband for 60 seconds at a time, and every time we returned to the crowd, we returned on purpose. In the middle of a slow song, my phone buzzed for the 1,000th time, and I told myself not to look, then looked anyway because I am not as evolved as I pretend to be. The post was already live. My sister's face in dramatic grayscale, mascara smudged like art, captioned with an epigram about being betrayed by family. The comments were an organised chorus now, a community formed around a narrative that was simpler than the truth. People called her brave for speaking up, called me names, speculated about details they invented to fill the gaps. I slipped the phone into Daniel's jacket pocket and said, "Keep this for me." And he pressed his forehead to mine and said, "We are real," and I believed him because I could feel his breath. When the last song ended and the lights softened and people began to collect their jackets and leftovers in foil, the quiet Daniel had promised arrived like a friend who had taken the later train but still came. We went back to the small room where I had waited before the aisle, and I opened the envelope I had addressed to myself and read the line, "You are not responsible for other people's storms." I cried the sort of tears that rinse, not the sort that stain. We went home and sat on the floor because there's something about sitting on the floor in expensive clothes, the way it returns you to the original version of yourself, the one that existed before any script. We ate leftover cake with our fingers and promised to tell our children one day not the dramatic version of the story, but the meaningful one. That two people chose each other in a world that asks you to choose an audience. 3 months later, when the fragility of attention had begun to fray, my sister texted, "I shouldn't have done that. I miss you." I read the words every which way. I tried to translate them into a language that didn't carry landmines. I did not answer for a week because I wanted to be sure that my response wasn't an old reflex dressed in new hope. I imagined a version of us where she came over with a carton of strawberries and we sat at my table and said all the true things with no one watching. I also imagined the version where she came over and filmed our conversation and posted a clip that cut off the part where I forgave her. Both versions felt unsteady, and my heart cannot live indefinitely on unsteady. I finally wrote, "I forgive you. I need space." It was both the smallest and most adult sentence I've ever sent. She read it and did not reply, which is a kind of reply. Sometimes love is not opening the door, not because the person at the threshold is a villain, but because you are no longer willing to make your home a stage. Sometimes healing is not reconciliation. Sometimes it is clarity. And I think about my sister when I see white dresses in shop windows, and when a headline mentions family drama, and when a stranger tells a story into a phone with the practiced cadence of someone who's learned the tempo of the algorithm. I wish her a kind of happiness that doesn't need an audience. I wish myself the same. I set boundaries now like furniture I actually plan to sit on, rather than decorative pieces I apologise for using. I learned to say no without adding a paragraph of justification. I learned to treat silence as a resting place, rather than a hallway I rush through. I learned that forgiveness is a gift I give myself more than it is a gift I hand to the person who cut me. It frees my hands for better work. I learned that the truest part of my wedding wasn't the cake or the dress, or even the vows spoken into a microphone, but the vow Daniel made to me in the quiet. The one without an audience, the one I recognised because it sounded like home, because it sounded like if you asked me whether I would change it all, tear up the invitation before she could, move the wedding, keep everything offline, watch more carefully for the tremors. That question imagines a world where control is a spell that works if you pronounce it precisely. I can only change the part where I used to believe I could rescue someone who doesn't want to be rescued. I can only change the part where I kept handing over microphones to people who mistake volume for truth. The rest I carry is a story that shaped me, and I tell it with my name removed and hers removed and the location blurred, not to erase reality, but to protect what is real about it. How it felt to be a person in a complicated family trying to become a person in a simpler one. How it felt to choose love in a time built for performance. How it felt to watch an old pattern rise up and decide, for the first time, to step aside and let it pass without stepping into it. There are weddings that look like movies and fall apart in the credits, and there are weddings that look like interruptions but become beginnings. Mine was the second kind. When I think back to the kitchen with the lemon bowl and the chipped mug and the neat stack of invitations, I don't see naivety. I see hope. I still believe in the quiet click of a seal pressed down. I still believe in the soft authority of a boundary. I still believe in a love that reaches for your hand not because the street is dangerous, but because it's you on the other side of the curb. And when the memory of the rip, clean, cruel, tries to reframe my day as a disaster I survived rather than a covenant I entered, I return to the letter I wrote myself, to the look on Daniel's face at the first look, to the way my body learned what it feels like to stand at an altar and choose. Not for the crowd, not for the photo, but for the life that waits when the music stops.